So thanks everyone for attending today, our monthly webinars. Today we're going to be talking about the business of photojournalism. And we have a very, very special guest, Gregory Mango. Greg developed an interest in photojournalism in high school after watching Bill Murray portray Hunter Thompson in Where the Buffalo Roam. He obtained BS in film and photography from Ithaca College in 1987. He started freelance photojournalism, his own business, in 1992. One of his first assignments was for City Limits magazine. From about 1992 to 2000, Greg worked as at a night job as a customer service employee at several photo labs, including Color Wheel Photography Lab, and slowly built up his photography client list. And since 2003, he's been a freelance photographer for the New York Post, covering a variety of different subject matters. And we're going to be talking a lot about that today. Greg has traveled all around the New York area, covering many different topics. And his work not only was featured in the Post, but also the New York Times, the Daily News, the Brooklyn papers, Newsweek, Time, and many other broadcast networks. So without further ado, I want to introduce you, Greg Mango. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure, Richard.
All right. So as many of you know, I'm a Richard Leibowitz. I'm a copyright lawyer and also photographer. I started out as a photographer, and now I'm helping all my fellow peers and friends with all their copyright infringement problems that everyone has, today. So Greg, tell us a little bit about yourself besides the introduction.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, Richard. Been doing it in this city now 28 years, it's been a real journey, and I have to say, gathering some images for you, going down memory lane, thinking about all the different assignments, where I've been, what I've photographed. It's been very rich and rewarding, I have to say. It's been a struggle, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. There was 8 years where I had to work basically 2 jobs. Because when you're first starting out, you're working for small little weekly publications. You're lucky if you get $50 for an assignment. So, and of course, in those days, there was some expenses because you had your film and your paper and, chemistry. I used to develop my own film, as I told you before we started. Used to develop my black and white film literally in my bedroom. And God knows what chemicals have affected me over the years. But in any case, that all changed, of course, in 2003. When I bought my first digital camera. But, I've talked to kids at Stuyvesant High School, kids at Brooklyn Tech, and I told them that, it's not like you're shooting the cover of Vogue where you're going to be making a lot of money early on. Obviously I make enough now to survive, but there was a long time where I didn't, and I had to have that second job. So it's not for the faint of heart, but if it's something that you really are passionate about, what I always often tell people is that, do what you love, because if you do what you love, you'll probably do it well. And although the money may not come in the beginning, as long as you're paying your bills, you will get better, you will get more money, and you will be successful. But it's been very rewarding for me. I have no complaints.
Oh, that's great. So Greg, how'd you start out getting clients? Like for those out there that are starting out, what did you do, to get clients?
Well, we're going back to 1992 when there was still a Yellow Pages. So it sounds so ridiculous now to say some of these things. But, I basically made a list of every weekly publication that I could find. Funny enough, I did interview with the New York Post in 1992. And I interviewed with a fine photo editor who's now retired. His name is Vern Scheibler, and he's a legend in the business. And I remember showing him my portfolio in 1992. At that time, of course, I was, 32? No, I wasn't. I was 27. That's when I started my business. And he loved the work, but he said, you know what, there's one thing you don't have in here. You don't have enough sports. Now, in those days, I guess, general assignment did include doing sports. Now, it's a whole specialty field, and that wouldn't be required of somebody today if they were interested in news photojournalism. But I didn't want to shoot sports. And so I said, well, okay, thank you for the compliments, but I'm going to find other ways to do photojournalism. And then I spent another 11 years building up my client base and also honing my skill set. I mean, there were, I'm known in the business for using a lot of flash. I like, I always say photography is writing with light. And if you don't have enough light, you can't make a good picture. So I remember in the early days, I would do flash calculations using guide numbers. And then if I had an orange filter or a blue filter on, I would have to add or subtract 1 or 2 stops of light. And this was all, most of this was transparency, 35 millimeter slide. And of course, anybody who's shot that stuff knows if it's 2 stops over, it's garbage. And if it's 3 stops under, it's barely salvageable. So this was all manual calculations that I did. And although I probably would have made a lot more money had I, went out and shot some stuff for some sports for the Post and started with them earlier on, I might not have had all those years to develop this skill set in terms of lighting that has, helped me very much throughout the year. So to answer your question, yes, I had that night job, and I just made a list of every small publication. One of the ones I worked for a long time was a publication called The Resident. They had 5 newspapers in Manhattan, 1 in Queens. Another one I worked on was Our Town. That was one that was very popular. I think it's still around. West Side, Manhattan Spirit. Same company owned that as Our Town, but they covered the other side, the west side of Manhattan. By the way, it's funny because one of the images I sent you was the cover of the newspaper, that boxer. I don't know if you recall that one, but that guy, was in Raging Bull. He did play Sugar Ray Robinson, and the story talks about his fall from grace. But the writer on that story was a guy named Corey Koganen. Anybody who reads the New York Times would know that he's one of their marquee, feature. Yeah, there it is right there on the left. That's Johnny Barnes. And that story was written by Corey Kilgannon. He's, like I said, now a very prominent writer at the New York Times. But a lot of these guys, another guy who worked for that publication was a guy named Pete Duffy. And he's got a whole bunch of books out now, different nonfiction stuff. So it's funny because, you don't get paid a lot and it's a small time publication, but it really is a place where you can hone your chops and meet people. And actually, it was the editor who worked at The Resident, who then later moved over to the New York Post, and in 2003 opened up a Brooklyn bureau, and he called me. I didn't even have to call the New York Post. They called me, and he said, I've known your work for 10 or 11 years now. I want to bring you on as part of the Brooklyn bureau. So, the money's not great. As my dad used to say, as long as you're paying your bills, don't worry about how, if you're working for the top publication or some weekly thing where you get paid $50. That's all irrelevant. The thing is, you're doing what you love, you're paying your bills, and you build it up from there. So it's a long, it was a long slog for me, and it's, it's not, I still have to break my behind every day, but, you look back on those years between 92 and 2003, 2004, and it was tough, but going for those small, independent, tiny little publications that need photographers, and they need cheap photographers, so that's what I recommend to everybody. Start small. And
how do you go about knowing the subject matters that you shoot? Being a New York photojournalist, there's so many things going on every day. What do you do to get what you shoot?
Well, there's a number of ways you can do that. In the early days, in that period between 92 and 2003, there was what I used to do is I used to actually, again, this all sounds so crazy. I used to go down to One Police Plaza, and they had a list of every location in the city where they were going to station police for a rally, a demonstration, a protest, whatever, a parade, whatever it might be. So I would go through that list and say, well, this sounds interesting, so let me go and shoot this. Later on, when I started actually getting assignments, a lot of the work I did between 92 and 2003 was not news. It wasn't spot news. they were features. They were news, but they were more features. So most of those assignments came from editors who, knew what they wanted. And, also they spent a fair amount of time describing to you what the story was about and telling you what they wanted. So you really had a clear idea of what to get for them. Later on, when I started, working more for the Post, then it became an issue of listening to the police scanner. And that wasn't something I had ever done, quite frankly. And that was tough because there's probably between police and fire, there might be 500 frequencies to listen to. So, it really became a challenge for me to kind of, which frequencies am I going to listen to? There is a service called BNN, and they have a whole bunch of people listening, and they will post stuff on their feed, which you can get on an app on the phone. So in case you missed something that, let's say you were listening to fire and something big came over on the police scanner and you didn't hear it because you were listening to fire, that would generally show up, on the BNN, the Breaking News Network is what that stands for. So that's kind of how I do it now. But, this, like I said, going down to Police Plaza and getting the lists of, where the police were going to be deployed. It sounds very arcane in a way with the internet and, you got Citizen and all these other things. So, wow. I'm old. Look, I'm 55 years old. So, I'm going to be talking about some stuff that people probably don't do anymore, like developing their own film, for example.
Now, when you go to these, let's say like spot news, events, or where there's like a lot of press and there's police, how do you deal with that? I mean, is there like protocols that you do? Like if police officers say to move certain places, or if there's so many photographers there, do you have something that you do to get the right shot?
That's an excellent question, Richard, because, those situations are what I call hot. You got a lot of anxious people, all, sort of gunning to get a good picture. And, there's a couple of things I would say. First and foremost, be a gentleman. There's a lot to be said for just coming in with an attitude where you're not yelling at the police and stuff like that. There've been other photographers who, even though we're on a street that obviously clearly, the Constitution says we can stand on the street and take a picture, sometimes they'll ask you to do them a favor, make it easier for them, move over to another spot. Maybe it's 30 feet away, maybe it's a different angle or whatever. I generally try to accommodate the cops, because it just makes my life a lot easier. I've had the press pass 28 years. I've never had it revoked. Other people have, and it ain't easy getting it back. So, you better, think twice before you start arguing with these guys. But, I'll give you this. One of the worst examples in my own life was about 4 or 5 days after 9/11. I had gotten kidney stones in the days, in the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday after, because if you recall it did happen on a Tuesday. I was in the hospital, but I came out Friday night and I said, I'm going right down there Saturday morning. I had gotten to the corner of Chambers Street and West Street, and there was a perimeter set up with a fence, and there was military police. And there was a gate, and he let me walk through. I showed him all my ID, but then an FDNY lieutenant grabbed me by the nape of the neck and pulled me out of there and said, you are not going in there. So what are you talking about? He says, there are a lot of people impersonating photographers. You might be one of them, and so you're not going in there. And, I couldn't get away from him. I really wanted to get in there, believe me. But I couldn't do it, and it was either that or risk getting arrested. And I chose to obey his orders, and that we did get taken down the next morning. And some of the pictures that I sent to you of the wreckage were taken the following morning, that following Sunday morning. That's it right there. The photo on the left was taken from my rooftop in Park Slope, and that was taken maybe 20 minutes before the South Tower collapsed. I got up on my roof about, the second plane had hit at 9:03. I was probably up there at 9:05, and the building collapsed at 10:03, I believe, the first tower. The tower number 2, but it was hit second but went down first. So that was probably taken between 9:05 and 10:05, somewhere in there, maybe 9:30, something like that. It was burning pretty good right then. most of the time, getting back to your question, I do try and accommodate. And now that's with the authorities. Now you also have to deal with the other photographers. Now, luckily for me, I happen to know most of these guys. And I often, have tried to help them. And they've helped me. I remember years ago, one of the famous photographers from the Daily News, a guy named Dave Hanshew, who actually got his legs broken on 9/11. I remember one time we were at St. Pat's, and I didn't have the right lens. I was too far away. You're held pretty far back from the altar. And he was there. He had a nice 300 millimeter lens. And he said to me, you want to borrow my lens? And of course, that saved the day for me. So I've tried to return those favors over the years. So whenever I'm in a hot situation with a lot of press, most of these guys I know, some of the women too I know. So I try and make space for them. Oftentimes if people are walking and you're backpedaling, what I try and do is try and get in there for about 5 to 7 seconds. And of course, you can fire off 20 pictures in that amount of time. And then you rotate out to the back of the pack. And it becomes a sort of a very fluid rotating situation. Most people respect that and they kind of go along with it. You get a straggler that wants to stay in front the whole time. I often joke, is, well, you got to get, you shot 75 pictures in the last 19 seconds. And really, that wasn't good enough, so I tease them and stuff. But a lot of it just has to do with coming down to respect. And then, there's also just oftentimes, to tell you the truth, Richard, I'm pretty good at predicting where people are going to walk. So oftentimes I'll see them, maybe they'll do a press conference, but I happen to know their car is in a certain spot. And I happen to like pictures without the podium and the mics all in front all the time. So maybe I'll start walking over to their car. See, now that one there, that particular shot those are both from Epstein, of course, and the woman in the middle is Virginia Roberts Gouffre. I might be mispronouncing her name, but that was a situation where there was a lot of people. And we had to rotate in and out. There was one particular friend of mine who will go unmentioned, who refused to get out of my way, but I was still able to get a clean shot. I'll tell you, he was a big guy too. So, there's no real set rules, but again, the best thing you can do is try and be respectful, and you'll wind up getting more than you think. And also with your subject matter, the picture on the left there. Now that's a posed portrait of Jeffrey Epstein. Not too many of those out there. Well, why is that? Well, there are two reasons. One is that the reporter who happened to accompany me that day was a very young, attractive woman, somewhere in her mid-20s. So of course, once he saw her, he kind of became a little more compliant. I mean, that's the only thing that I can assess from the way he behaved. But I let her do her interview. We were probably there for about 15 minutes. And I have to tell you, he is one smooth talker. He almost had me convinced that he hadn't done anything wrong. I mean, after the reporter finished her interview, I very respectfully said, would he mind if I took a few portraits? And that's why he's lit up with flash. He's looking right at me. That's right in front of his building. He had come into town. The story that I heard was that he came to town to get a root canal from Florida. And the day before, he was spotted in Central Park I believe he was photographed by my friend Jay, who is, I believe he works for Splash, and got a picture of him with Prince Andrew walking through Central Park. Pretty famous picture. You may have seen it. And so the editor had figured, well, if he's in Central Park, he's probably home. So we went to his house. He was there. He came out of his building. We're very polite. And I'll tell you one last thing. So after I was done doing the pictures, he said, what I did in Florida is not a crime in New York. I said, what do you mean? He says, the age for what he was convicted of is in Florida is 18, but in New York it's 17. And what he said to me, he said, wait right here. He went back into the building, came out with a Xerox copy of a driver's license of one of these girls. And he showed it to me. He said, you see, she's 17. Here's the license, but in New York, it wouldn't have been illegal. So he's a very smooth talker. And if you see some of these documentaries on him, he bamboozled a lot of people. And that's how I think how he got away with a lot of stuff.
Wow. So now, shooting celebrities or people in the public spotlight, how do you approach them when you're photographing them? I mean, oftentimes there's a lot of photographers there, but you call them by their name to get their attention, or do you, what do you tend to do?
Well, that brings to mind a particular story involving Lou Reed. one of my favorite musicians. There was only 3 photographers there, but this was an event at BAM. One of my clients was the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And that gave me the opportunity to meet a lot of famous people. They have these fall and spring galas to raise money because, of course, they're nonprofit. And they have a lot of really well-known celebrities. I can think off the top of my head, Baryshnikov, Isabella Rossellini, Willem Dafoe, the picture you showed earlier, that he was there. That's in the upstairs of BAM. They have a cafe up there where they had the reception after the event. But this was a night for his girlfriend, Laurie Anderson. And so when I first approached him in the beginning of the evening, he said, listen, I'm not having my picture taken tonight. No one's taking my picture. It's Laurie's night. She had done some stories to sing and talk about regarding Moby Dick. It was a very interesting concept for that gala. But anyhow, so I couldn't get a picture of him. Now, at the end of the night, I'm a big fan of his. And I had been listening to an album of his called Magic and Lost, but I believe it's from 1990. And it was about one of his friends who died of cancer, another one who died of AIDS. And I had been listening to that album when my mother was dying of cancer too, back in 1996. And so at the end of the evening, he was by himself at the table. He had a cup of coffee and his dessert. And I went up to him, I had my camera down, and I said, Mr. Reed, I just want to tell you that your album from 1990, Magic and Lost, it really helped me when my mother was dying of breast cancer. Thank you for that. This guy stood up like a general had just walked into the room, and he was a soldier and needed to salute this. Stood up, he says, you want to take a picture? Laurie, he calls Laurie Reddick, take as many pictures as you want. Of course, the other 2 photographers come running across the room because they want to get in on it. But again, it's about that respect. And also the fact that I wasn't telling him something that wasn't true. I don't want to use foul language, but I wasn't saying something when he felt that I knew the album and that I was connecting with him, and it hit him, and it worked. So that's another, again, a lot of it just comes down to respect. It's amazing how people respond when you treat them well.
Yeah, right. I think that's a big part of being the business of photojournalism, right? Just being respectful, taking the shots and getting great shots. And, it's very interesting to see, that part of the business.
It definitely helps. And if you have a personal story like I had with the Lou Reed situation, it works out well. My sister went to school with Bethany Frankel. So when she was at court going through her divorce with her guy, I talked to her about that story. And again, put her at ease. And she was way more amenable to having her picture taken. It's just amazing. If you can come up with those, not obviously you can't do that for every celebrity that you run into, but on occasion, if you can think of something that they might appreciate that's real, they tend to respond to that.
That's great.
I'll make one other point too about which lens you use, because a lot of photographers tend to use that long lens. And it's great. It's got great. I love the long lens. But in terms of, photographing people in particular, you put the long lens on, a lot of times they're not even looking at you because you might be 50 feet away. Whereas if you have that 24 to 70, you got to get up close to them and then they're going to see you, right? And then it's either, do you just take some shots and go away, or do you sit and talk to them? I tend to talk. I'm a talker. You can tell I'm talking now. I tend to talk to people. They look at me, what do you do? I'll tell them what I'm doing and what we're doing. Even if it's somebody who doesn't want to be photographed, if you tell them why you're there and what story you're working on, not only are they sometimes more relaxed, but sometimes they might want to tell their side of the story. And so if you put the shorter lens on, it forces the photographer to get closer and not stand back with a 200 and, do it that way. So that's a choice that the photographer has to make. I generally go with the shorter lens most of the time.
Very interesting. Now, in this digital world, today there's a big problem of copyright infringement. And now we're going to delve into a landmark copyright infringement case that we pursued in court for Greg. That we'll get into, and I want to talk about the case, and I want Greg to talk a little bit about how he got the shot. But this was a great case, and we're going to talk a little bit about the law and how that all works. So the case was Mango versus Buzzfeed, case in New York, where Greg took a photograph of a gentleman, Raymond Parker, from Brooklyn, New York. Picture of him on the left. He was denied a job as a 9/11 operator and radio dispatcher. Parker then sued the city for discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. Parker suffered chronic sleeplessness, anxiety, increased depression, and a feeling of being withdrawn. And the lawsuit demands that the NYPD be barred from engaging in any act or practice that discriminates against any employee or applicant for employment on the basis of disability. So, Greg, tell us a little bit how you got this this photo and how it came about.
Sure. So we have the New York Post has a bunch of reporters who work just the courts. That's all they do. That's their job. They've got one woman at 100 Center Street. That's for a criminal court. They also have somebody at 60 Center Street for the civil cases. So I guess this was actually a federal case. So we did, obviously, there's also a court reporter at the Southern District. And of course, this case was filed by Preet Baraha. So that's a district attorney you don't want to mess with, and a U.S. attorney. But anyhow, so we had a court reporter at the federal court had seen that the lawsuit was filed by the Southern District, by the U.S. attorney for the Southern District. So they got the name out of the complaint. And so then the New York Post has a library where they search names to try and find addresses. So they said, let's see if we can't find this guy, Raymond Parker. They gave me an address in East New York. And they told me to meet up with a reporter named Lorena Mongelli, one of the senior reporters at the New York Post. So we went to the first address, and of course, he didn't live there. And a lot of times this happens. You get an old address, and then it just becomes a question of sort of a treasure hunt. All right, how can we figure out where this guy lives? Well, in this particular case, we found somebody who knew him, who put us in touch, if I'm not mistaken, with one of his relatives. And the next thing you know, we got a second address, which we went to. And I have to be honest with you, Richard, I can't remember if we had to go to a third address. We definitely had to go to a second address, perhaps a third address, but finally we did find this man. And he was very nice. He welcomed us into the house. And as it turned out, if I'm not mistaken, the day we were there was the day the case was settled. Because the reporter at the courthouse didn't even know there was a settlement. We were going there we thought it was still an open case. But he came, he showed us all this paperwork. I think I photographed some of it. And he said, yeah, they settled today. So that was big news for the court reporter. But anyhow, we did a nice interview with him. And again, I said, would you mind if you just sit on the couch? It was a very, very small apartment. So I didn't have a lot of flexibility in terms of having a creative background. One of the things that I did ask him to do, and a lot of times you'll want to do this as a photographer, is you want props. Props make, I think, the photo more interesting. Of course, there's no props in this picture, but what he did have was a bunch of containers, medicine. He had medicine for his HIV condition. And what I wanted to do was have him with some of these, the sort of brownish bottles that the pills are in. I wanted to have those in the shot to make the photograph more complex. But he didn't feel comfortable with that. So I said, well, that's fine. You could just sit on the couch. And so it was a pretty short photo session, and not a lot of variability in terms of composition and different props. A lot of times the editors want you to send them 15 pictures, and vertical, horizontal, standing, full length, half length, just a headshot with some props, without the props. They want to have a lot to choose from, so that when they go to do the layout, they could, do maybe 2 pictures, one with just him by himself, maybe a second one with the medicines, things like that. But in this particular case, I think I probably only took about 7 pictures that I sent in. I mean, I sent in 7. Obviously, I probably shot 50, but edited it down to, I think, 6 or 7 pictures. Pretty much the same as what you see here.
Okay. So the photograph then appeared in the New York Post on this article shown right now. And what's important to note is next to the arrow underneath is Greg's photo credit, which is called a gutter credit. It's underneath the photograph. That's considered copyright management information, the photograph underneath. So here was the article, and next thing you know, look what happened. Buzzfeed, the big, also news outlet and blog, and they created an article, right, very similar to the New York Post article, and look at what they did. They copied the photograph, and next to the arrow, they actually credited the law firm. So instead of the credit underneath the photograph for Greg Mango, look, they just credited the law firm. And so we ended up suing Buzzfeed for copyright infringement and also for removal of copyright management information. So meaning that they not only copied the photograph and infringed upon Greg's photo, but they also removed Greg's credit, which is another claim that I'm going to talk about in the next slide. So this BuzzFeed reporter, he was a veteran reporter. He was there for about like 6 years. He did thousands of articles. This was a bench trial. The judge ended up deciding the case. And Mike Hayes, the reporter that you see over there, he ended up taking the stand. And the judge was basically grilling him and saying, you're a veteran reporter. You know better. Why did you infringe upon the photo? Why did you use it without permission? And then he really tested the limit by saying, why did you not credit, Greg as the photographer of the photograph? So the reporter, Mike Hayes, went back and forth and said, oh, he contacted the law firm. And the law firm said that it was okay to use it. And ended up being that Mike Hayes really did not get it from the law firm. He ended up going to the New York Post and just right-clicking on the photograph and just copying it from the New York Post. So there was a credibility, issue that was going on. And the judge ended up finding that BuzzFeed willfully infringed upon Greg's photo. And I want to get to the law so that you understand, in regular English what it means. But this next slide is what the law is, what the statute says about removing copyright management information, which was, a very big thing in this case because they removed the credit. They altered the credit underneath the photo. So under 17 U.S.C. 1202B, no person shall, without the authority of the copyright owner, intentionally remove or alter any copyright management information, distribute or import for distribution CMI, copyright management information, knowing that the copyright management information has been removed or altered without authority of the copyright owner. And then what it needs to be is knowing or having reasonable grounds to know that it will induce, enable, facilitate, or conceal an infringement of any right under this title. So that's the law. And what does that mean? That basically means that someone cannot intentionally remove your credit. So in this particular case, Greg's credit was underneath the photograph on the New York Post website, and BuzzFeed did not credit Greg and instead added the law firm name. And they knew that the law firm did not own the photograph, or they should have known, instead, the veteran reporter did not credit Greg, and the court found that this was a willful infringement. And the damages for this particular claim is between $2,500 to $25,000 plus attorney's fees and costs. And what's interesting about this particular law is that your work does not need to be registered with the U.S. Copyright Office to get these damages. Unlike copyright infringement, to get statutory damages, you need to have it registered within 3 months of first publication. So this is a very landmark case that really set the stage for this copyright management information law that basically said that someone cannot intentionally remove copyright management information, and there's very little case law on it. And next thing you know, BuzzFeed appealed, and their appeal was that they did not intentionally remove the credit. They said that they got it from the from the basically law firm, and they argued, they said that that they themselves, and I'll get it over here, did not intend for basically others, third parties, to conceal infringement. BuzzFeed argued that the DMCA required proof that the defendant knew its conduct would lead to future third-party infringement. But the Second Circuit disagreed, finding that the plain and unambiguous language of the statute did not require this, and that BuzzFeed's awareness that improperly attributing the photograph would conceal its own infringing conduct was enough to satisfy the DMCA's signed here requirements. And this BuzzFeed reporter was responsible for posting the photograph, testified at trial. You know, he's worked at BuzzFeed for over 6 years, published more than 1,000 articles, and he ended up using it anyway, and he removed the credit, you know, and the Second Circuit affirmed the district court level's findings, and it was a really great result. And the court found that BuzzFeed willfully infringed, and after a bench trial awarded $8,750 plus over $44,000 attorney's fees. So basically for one photo, you know, that was infringed, you know, north of $50,000 for just infringing one photo, which, you know, is, you know, definitely a lot of money for, you know, just infringing upon one photo. So I want to show here the copyright registration. Here was the Greg's registration, where it shows the name, Raymond Parker, and it also has the date of first publication next to it, 1/18/2017. So everything lined up really perfectly for this case. And the court agreed with the position that Greg took, that this was a willful infringement, and they removed the credit. And Greg, do you want to talk about, you know, your experience testifying at trial for the case?
Yeah, I'll talk about it. So a couple things. You know, BuzzFeed is obviously a very large media corporation. They do rely on intimidation to get you to back down. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, you know, during discovery, you know, they asked for certain documents, right? They'd ask for my contract with the Post and any paperwork that was related to what I got paid that day, stuff like that. Well, we gave them all that before they subpoenaed the New York Post. So they didn't need to subpoena the New York Post because we gave them all the documents they asked for because they didn't have anything to hide. But one of the things they try to do is they try and bank on the fact that because I'm a freelancer, that maybe the director of photography doesn't want to be bothered with getting the legal department involved. And that maybe they'll say, well, you know, Mango's just causing all these problems, just don't call him for work anymore. I mean, it could happen, right? Luckily, it didn't happen, you know. I have a pretty good relationship with the director of photography, although he's not even there anymore, but at the time he was. So that's one thing you have to prepare for. You have to know that, you know, it's not a cakewalk, that they will try and intimidate. I think they also had suggested that they were going to make a motion for me to set aside a bond so that when they win the case, there'll be money set aside to pay their legal fees. They never made that motion, but the threat was there, according to James. So there's that aspect of it. But the thing is, as long as you have your true north, which is that they stole a photograph and took my name off, you stick to that, you know, it should get you through. That's one thing. The other thing is, in terms of figuring out the value of that photo, that was, they stipulated to liability. The only question was, okay, well, how much should we give him? Separate from taking the name off, they had to come up with a number of what the compensation for the taking of the photo would be. Now, how did we do that? Well, what I did was I went back through my tax returns from 2005 to 2018, and I pulled out 43 licensing agreements that I had saved and had used those as evidence in the case to show the judge what I have charged other people, because the judge needs some concrete numbers to value your photo. So that was some work, you know, that took at least a day or two. I scanned all those old documents and put them into an Excel spreadsheet, color-coded by year. It made it a lot easier for James to organize this stuff. And so that is something you want to make sure you have. In the judge's order, and I have to give Judge Marrero a lot of thanks for doing the fantastic job that he did. The documents that we presented showed a range between $250 a photo and $750 a photo. Rather narrow range, quite frankly. And so based on everything that went on in the trial, one of the last questions that James asked me was, well, what would you have asked BuzzFeed for this photo? And I said $1,000. In the judge's order, he says, of course, that's just the opening bid. Doesn't mean I would have gotten 1,000, but because I had provided evidence that I got many photos, a fair amount of photos at $750 a photo, and multiple licenses at $500. When it came time for the judge to decide, he gave me the $750, figuring that, well, he might not have got 1,000, but he definitely would have gotten 500, and maybe he would have gotten $750, based on the evidence I had provided. So that's where the $3,750 comes from. Apparently, they're using these multiples of 3 to 5 times, and again, the judge gave me the higher number, the number 5. So 5 times 750, of course, is 3,750. So you have to be aware that there's some intimidation involved, and also that there's some work involved. Those are the 2 main things that I can add to the conversation.
Yeah. So it's a very fascinating case. You could look it up a little bit more. You could read the judge's decision in a little bit more detail on how he decided it. But, it was a really great case, and great to see the beginning, middle, and end from Greg taking the photograph, right, going there, shooting it, going to many different addresses to try to find Raymond Parker, right, to then providing it to the New York Post, then putting it on the website, finding that BuzzFeed actually used the photograph, registering the work with the Copyright Office, and then filing the lawsuit, doing discovery, and then doing a trial and an appeal. So it takes a long time, but, you see the justice system work, when you really see this in action, So it's really just a really great outcome, for all photojournalists that, people cannot steal your work, cannot infringe upon your work, and cannot remove your photo credit. They have to credit you with, as the photographer of the photograph, or else there's, they may be liable for removal of copyright management information. So very, very fascinating case. So now we want to leave about 15 to 20 minutes for any questions from the audience on anything that we discussed today, or anything that you may have.
All right, Rich, so we have some questions for you. First question, Sid asks, how do you sell, and to whom do you sell your photo essays?
All right, Greg, you want to?
That's for me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. How do I sell my photo essays? Well, basically at this point in my career, I pretty much work solely for the New York Post. I do have a couple of side projects I'm working on, and one of them is on Ground Zero. I also have, you've seen some of these shots, I did a nightlife column between 92 and 2002. So while all my friends were out drinking in the bars on those Friday and Saturday nights, I was going to clubs and restaurants and doing work there. So that may be a second book. So I haven't really sold, when I get a call for photos, I often, this is something I tell all the photographers, tell them you have more than one picture. As I described earlier, you want to have different scenes, compositions with different elements in the photos. Could be different people that are all part of the same story. So in that sense, maybe if I'll tell a client, and by the way, this was also mentioned in the law, the judge mentioned all this in his order, because a lot of times what these people will try to do is they'll try and take what you get paid for your day rate and say, well, that's what the equivalent of the licensing fee would be, where I actually went in and I listed 5 different criteria for how I come up with the price. But the other thing I also do is I try and sell more than one picture. So when you sell 4 or 5 pictures, you want to call that a photo essay, the amount per photo may be lower than if you just sell one, but because they get the discount for quantity, but the overall price is higher, and Judge Marrero mentioned that too. So, you know, it's hard to really answer that question because I don't sell a lot of photo essays other than if I sell a package, that's how I do it.
Interesting.
Great. We have a question. Susan is asking, what is the best way to protect my photos?
Okay. So the best way to protect your photos is, I would say, number one thing is to get your photos registered with the Copyright Office. I mean, so many photographers come to me and say, you know, they tell me their work's been infringed upon, they don't register their work, but registering work with the Copyright Office is the golden ticket to really succeeding in a lawsuit, because you could get the statutory damages for a willful infringement. So the range is between $750 up to $150,000. So, you know, if your work is registered timely with the Copyright Office, you could get those damages. But even if it's not registered timely, and the case with Greg's case that there was no photo credit, or they removed the credit, you could still get, you know, the $2,500 to $25,000. So I think that's number one. And I would say the next thing to do is to probably watermark your work. You know, if you're putting your work up on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you know, I would just make sure your work is watermarked with a little watermark, you know, either on the photo or below it, like in a photo credit, and so that people are on notice on who owns the copyright. Now, in the case of Greg's case, right, the Buzzfeed case, the reporter, right, knew that Greg took the photograph, and it was very interesting. You know, Judge Marrero, the judge on the case, ended up really drilling down on the fact that, you know, the editor knew that it was Greg's photo. And he, on the stand, he kept on saying, oh, you know, I didn't really see the photo credit, you know, underneath the photograph. And the judge was like pretty much, you know, shocked that he did not see the credit underneath the photograph. He was saying, oh, it was hard to see. And it was a credibility issue, and the judge was not buying it, you know. And what was very funny is during the trial, one of the law clerks actually blew up this New York Post article very big, and the judge said, could you see it now? And it was really funny, and the reporter ended up saying, yes, I see it now. But the judge was not buying that he did not see the photo credit underneath the photograph, and you know, he really did know it was Greg's photograph. So it's important that, you know, when you do license things to, let's say, news outlets or, you know, even television broadcast, that you have a credit associated with your photograph, so that whoever wants to use your photograph down the road knows that it's you, and they could contact you, you know, many different ways. Social media, right? They could direct message you. They could go onto your Facebook page, you know, or in this particular case, you know, if BuzzFeed wanted to have the photograph, they could have contacted Greg directly, or they could have contacted the New York Post, which happens regularly with freelancers for the New York Post. Yeah. And editors will provide phone numbers or an email address to the photographer, because the photographers own the copyright to the photograph. And in this particular case, you know, my case could have easily done that, but he took the shortcut and ended up, you know, not contacting Greg for to license the photograph, and ended up using it anyway, and adding, you know, the law firm's name there, knowing that they don't own the copyright. So I think those three things: registration, watermark, and I'm sorry, I didn't mention metadata. Metadata is very important, making sure that within the camera, you put your name or your email address or phone number, because today, you know, it's very easy to right-click on the photograph, and you have all this information about the photographer who took the photo, and they could just contact you to license the work. So I think those three things, I think, are very crucial to protect your work out there. This not only applies to photos, but it also applies to video. It applies to digital art. It applies to, you know, pretty much anything. You know, copyright, you know, applies to anything in a tangible medium. So I think it's those three things I think are very crucial. Greg, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was pretty funny when he made my case. He was standing about 6 feet away from that screen, and he just, you know, the judge just wasn't buying it. He says, you know, do you see it? That was interesting. I would also add that I'm going to say, well, I you know, just to give, you know, you a little prop here because, one of the things with this whole registration, I had worked with another copyright lawyer who insisted that I do all that work. And one of the things I love about your firm, Richard, is that, you take care of those registrations for us. Most photographers that are working don't have the time to find the image, the stolen image, let alone then go ahead and send it down to the Library of Congress and get the thing registered. So what I really like about the way you handle this is that you're a one-stop shop in that sense. So taking a lot of the burden off of me having to come home after, I'm working till 7, 8 o'clock at night. And I got to, sit home and go through the internet and find these things and register them. It's just a lot of work. So, yeah, I think, what you've said is exactly right, that you want to get these things registered and watermarked. And I'll also mention that, at one point the judge, he was questioning me directly. And one of the questions, because Michael Hayes kept saying that, well, we didn't have time to contact him. That was one of his excuses. We're on a tight deadline. So he asked me, he said, how long does it take to get a firm a photo if they call you? I said, well, let me tell you, if I have my laptop and it's a current image that's within the last 6 months, I keep about 6 months of work on the laptop, and they have the authority to agree to the price, because a lot of times a lower level person will call. Then when you give them the price, they say, all right, well, I got to go check with the boss. I'll get back to you. If they have the authority to agree to a price and I have my laptop, I told the judge they can get it in 15 minutes. So there's no reason why they couldn't have contacted me. It just wasn't, as you say, it just wasn't credible.
All right. Great answer. We got a few more questions. Let's see. Colette is asking, is it customary for freelancers to register their work? I worked for the Post for a year in 1995, was able to keep my negatives. Should I register the photos that were published?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I think that, you definitely should, start registering your work with the Copyright Office. A lot of people come up to me and say, oh, I have so many years of archives, tens of thousands of photographs. Start slowly, start with, let's say you take a year, right? Let's say you shot, 2005, all the photographs that you've published in 2005, get them all registered, digitize them, put them all into one folder, then slowly do 2006 and gradually do it. So at the end, let's say, may take a year or so to do it all, but then what you do, how long do you own the copyright? 70 years after your death. So that's a very long time, and you could have this for generations, your kids or your family, because photographs are going to be out on the web, forever. You go onto Google Images, right? You just type in, Raymond Parker, right? Greg's photograph is going to be on there, basically probably forever, and, who knows what happens down the road if, Raymond Parker has, let's say, another lawsuit down the road. Now we know, Greg's photograph is registered with the Copyright Office, right? And, if someone decides to infringe upon it again down the road, he is protected. His work is registered, with the Copyright Office, and you never know. And it happens all the time. So let's say it's a celebrity that you shot in 1991, right? Next thing you know, what happens if he or she, gets famous again, or, something happens with them, or they make it in the news and they just go onto Google Images and type in the subject matter's name. And next thing you know, they just right click save as, right? And they find your photo. What's very interesting is if someone or a media outlet or a newspaper or a magazine or a publisher, if they want a photograph, they're going to know where to try to find it. They're going to go onto Google. They're going to search social media, Facebook, Instagram. They're going to grab it, and having your work register with the Copyright Office is the golden ticket, because you could get the statutory damages where you sue them for $150,000. That's a lot of money that they may be out. So
all right, great.
That's important.
Great. Rich, I think we have time for one more question, and actually two people asked related questions, so we can probably put it together. One is, how do you lock the metadata so no one can change it? And the other is, Gmail seems to sometimes strip metadata away. Do you have anything to say about Google and has started to get on board with license messages?
Let's say, Greg, do you know the answer to that for with the photo with the metadata? I think it's built into the camera.
Yeah,
right?
it's produced in the camera, which of course you have to be very careful, because there have been editors in the past that if they think your quality of your work is not good, they'll go and check the metadata and see what lens you use and what shutter speed you shot it at, what f-stop, all sorts of crazy stuff. So I do believe the metadata is created in the camera. I don't know about how it gets stripped out on Google. I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very easy today for for people to strip out the metadata. But as long as you yourself put the metadata in the photograph, you could tell a judge, or you could tell the other side that, look, I put the metadata in the photograph when I took the photograph, and it's on the camera. Here it is. And that's all you have to do. You just have to show that you put the copyright management information on the photograph or in the metadata. And if they strip it out, you could argue, look, I don't know who did it. We think that they did it, and they're going to argue, oh, it was a third party who stripped it out. So I think it's just important that for you to put the metadata in the photograph, and it's very easy today. All cameras have this on the settings, and you could put in as many things as possible. You put your name, the date it was shot, your address, your phone number, your email address, all these different ways, so that ultimately they could contact you if someone wants to license the photograph.
Yeah, I would add that that was something that one of the editors told me years ago. When you're in Photoshop, I use Photoshop to caption. He said, put your phone number in there and put an email address in there. This way, as you said, somebody wants to contact you, it's right there in the photo.
Yes, I think it's very crucial.
And stripping away the metadata may be the equivalent of stripping away a watermark.
Exactly. And there it is. Removing the copyright management information could get you, these damages, 2,500, 25,000 plus attorney's fees, and it's very, very hefty price that they have to pay if they do find that they intentionally did that.
We only have 2 minutes left, but a quick question, and maybe more for Greg. Any tips on how to pitch a story?
Well, it should be a good story to begin with. It should be something that you have a lot of knowledge on, because they may, want to ask you some details about why it's important. If you have sources, that's always super important. If you know people, some of my photographer friends, they're very friendly with police officers. And sometimes, you can get, so you want to call it privileged information, stuff that not everybody has, but they give you some inside information that may help you to sell, to pitch a story, because that something may be happening in 2 or 3 days that other people don't know about. So a lot of it comes down to developing relationships and contacts, and then, you have to tailor it to your market. The Post, I think if it's not like hard news, they like quirky stuff. I'm trying to think of some of the fun, like there was one I did where a girl had a bird. I don't remember what kind of bird, but a bird had made its home, somehow came in through the kitchen window and had made a nest in one of her colanders. So, just weird, quirky stuff so you have to sort of tailor the story to the publication, what they like, what they prefer. That would be one thing to consider. And like I said, if you've got some sources and something that's unique that other people don't know about, that could help get an editor interested.
Right. And then Rich, one last quick one. I take video and post on Twitter. Are the news outlets allowed to take it and use it? And if not, what should I do?
That's a great question, and it happens every second of the day. Someone posts on Twitter, and next thing you know, you have a television station or a media outlet or newspaper just grabs it from Twitter. And the answer to that is no, they cannot do that. They cannot take your work from social media. You own the copyright to the work that you put on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. But when you are posting on these websites, you're granting the social media sites, you're granting Facebook or Instagram or Twitter a license. It does not mean that a third party, such as a broadcaster or a newspaper, could then just go onto social media and grab it and put it on air or put it on their website. They're not allowed to do that. they have to get the proper permissions. They have to private message them or just message them directly and get the proper permissions. And it doesn't seem like these media outlets, they just keep infringing, and you just have to know that they cannot do that. And if they do infringe upon your work, you may have a case against them for copyright infringement. And if they don't credit you, if it's posted on your social media site and you have your name next to the photo or the video and they don't credit you, that may be another claim as well.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And we don't have time for more questions. So if you do have questions, please be sure to email them to info@leibowitzlawfirm.com. The email address is on the bottom of the slide. And I'll leave it to Rich and Greg to wrap it up.
Great. So I want to thank everyone for watching today's webinar. Greg, I want to thank you so much for attending and participating in this webinar today. I think it was very helpful for everyone. I think that it was a really great case against Buzzfeed. We make some great precedent, and for all photojournalists out there. So I want to thank you again so much. If anyone has any questions, feel free to contact us. And stay tuned for our next webinar next month on another topic. Feel free to email us with any topics you may want to hear, or if you want to be featured in our newsletter. So I want to thank everyone and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Richard, for all your great work.
Thanks, Greg.